Good evening. It's a great pleasure to be here, and let me first thank Matt for having set up this conference. It's fun to be here, especially because in Berlin, where I come from, at this time of the year, it's wet, it's dark and cold. You know, like here in this room. I'm always amazed that the Americans try to show that they are able to run air conditioning. Anyhow, one of the staff said, it's late in the afternoon, you better try to be a little bit entertaining. I try my best. So what I want to do is to give you some kind of idea of what is going on in the field of quantum science and quantum technology in Europe. There is a long tradition, of course, with respect to quantum science in Europe. And as a matter of fact, there are many devices, technologies that came out of quantum science. Like the laser, NMR, transistor, GPS, optical fiber. This is a view on the X-ray free electron laser that just started to operate in Hamburg. It's a 3-kilometer long accelerator, electron accelerator to produce coherent X-ray radiation like LCLS at SLAC, but at a higher repetition rate and with much higher intensity. Okay, so what about the second quantum revolution? My wife asked me, tell me what's so special about, you know, this quantum technology, because, I mean, she is in humanities, but still, it's a good question. What is the story about the second quantum revolution? Now, my explanation is it's the creation, detection, and manipulation of single quantum entities. That's the big difference. Because otherwise, quantum science is well known for more than 100 years. I've shown the Dalai Lama. Why did I show the Dalai Lama? There is a nice story about the Dalai Lama visiting Innsbruck University. At that time, Anton Zeilinger, maybe some of you know him, an Austrian physicist who also, you know, thinks about philosophical ideas, was there, and the Dalai Lama wanted to see him. But he also knew that Rainer Blatt had an experiment running in the same building with a single ion. And the Holiness wanted to see the light from the single ion impinging on his own retina. That's the second quantum revolution. You know, that's manipulating, it's creating, manipulating, and detecting single quantum entities. So that's always my simple explanation on what the second quantum revolution is all about, if you know, I have to explain it to non-experts. Now, what about this quantum flagship initiative? There are, since a number of years, quantum flagships. There are flagships in Europe. So far, two. One is on simulating the human brain, and the other one is on graphene. And these flagship initiatives have a budget of 1 billion euros over 10 years. 50% comes from the European Union, from Brussels, via contributions from all the member states. And the additional 500 million have to come by extra programs from the member states. That's the idea of these flagship initiatives. And 2 years ago, the idea came up to also have a flagship on quantum technology, and an initiative that from the very beginning wanted to bring together the private sector and academia. That's a difference also compared to the two already existing flagships. Now, Carl already showed this global landscape. If you look at it, you see, of course, North America, especially the US, but as Carl said, Canada is also going strong. D-Wave is coming from there, but of course, they also have excellent academic places like Waterloo with the Quantum Valley around it, supported by the founder of BlackBerry. You have China, very active. I'm always impressed by the dynamics of our Chinese colleagues. If you look, for example, at quantum communication using satellites, they are at least in the non-dark area leading at the moment. Maybe there are also satellites for quantum communication that we don't know about run by the US. I don't know, maybe. But in the sense of making it public, China is leading. That's not so obvious. They have a program set up, I think also something between 3 and 5 billion euros over the next couple of years for quantum science, especially quantum communication, but also quantum computing. Australia, compared to its size, is also pretty active, high quality. And then, of course, there is a little bit in South America and, of course, Europe. And if you look at the numbers for Europe, let me go back. You see it's not that bad compared to, for example, the US or China and so forth. There are quite some activities. In 2016, a paper, some kind of white paper, was made public called Quantum Manifesto, where a couple of thousand scientists and also researchers from companies contributed to really make the point that quantum technology should be supported at a larger scale from Brussels. And this is the distribution of those people contributing to the Quantum Manifesto. And as you can see, there is a large contribution from Germany, the UK, France, Italy, and Spain also have significant activities. I would say the usual suspects. The Netherlands are pretty active in that area compared to its size, as is Switzerland and Austria. You know, Switzerland doesn't directly belong to the European Union. They are associated, as is Israel, by the way. So that's the landscape. More than a year ago, I was asked to chair a high-level steering committee to prepare for this quantum flagship, and the committee members came from the private sector, from different companies spread all over Europe, and from academia. And you see here the names of the committee members. You also see that with respect to the companies, there is a good mixture between big companies and smaller, medium-sized companies, as well as startups. So we had a year to make recommendations on the research strategy, the implementation model, and the governance structure. And in early November, we handed over the report. It's in the internet, and you can, I give you the link later on, you can look it up in more detail. Now, what's the outcome? Not very surprising. We said we will have 4 large pillars: communication, computation, simulation, and sensing and metrology. And then 1 underlying activity in the field of basic science. What does this mean? This means that everything that somehow is basic but related to either communication, computation, and so on, should be in those, let's say, main areas, also with respect to submitting proposals. But there should be also the chance to come up with something completely new that nobody is thinking of today. And that's in this basic science bar. We also discussed whether we should have a separate pillar on, for example, quantum software, quantum algorithms, and so far. But we said this should be included again in, for example, quantum computation or quantum simulation. But we said we want to have cross-lying activities on engineering and control, software theory, and of course education and training. They should be part at the end of the 4 vertical pillars. Now, I can say a few words on quantum computation, but before that, let me comment a little bit more on these 4 vertical pillars. Another question was, should computation and simulation be just one big area? At the end, we decided we want to have separate topics, computation on one side and simulation on the other side. And again, I think there are good reasons to do that. We also took sensing and metrology together. Probably sensing and metrology with respect to applications and interest of companies, at least in Europe, is the most promising if you look at a 5-year perspective. Whereas, as we discussed the whole day, computation, of course, is a little bit further away. Now, if you look into the report, I don't want to go into the details here, we somehow distinguish between milestones, application goals, enabling tools, and types of project, and did this for time frames of 3 years, 6 years, 10 years. And all these, let's say, topics were discussed during the day. And I think if you want to know more about it, just look it up in the report. The challenge always is to be ambitious, but not too ambitious so that at the end you can't deliver. And there was a long discussion also within the committee, also with our colleagues from industry. How ambitious do we want to be? And how do we deal with this, danger that is always there to oversell things? And I hope that at the end we came up with something which is somehow realistic. Okay. Now, software theory, engineering, control is something that is, as I said, cross-cutting the big fields that I mentioned. And especially engineering and control, if you want to build something besides the software. We heard a lot about this afternoon about, applying quantum computing to special problems, and at the end, if you have the hardware, it's maybe a question of having the right software, the right algorithm to look for special solutions to special problems. But I think you really have to push also the hardware, which starts with cryotechnology and ends up with, let's say, lasers or something like that, detectors, single photon detectors, for example. So that's important too, and this will be part of the consortia too. We will have large-scale projects on one hand and small focused projects on the other hand. What is important too is to set up infrastructure. I will come back to that in a moment. in Europe, we don't have at the moment companies like Google, Microsoft, IBM that really invest heavily into this field of quantum technology, especially quantum computing. That just doesn't exist in Germany. Karl was mentioning Siemens. When I started to work on this committee, I really had to call up someone, the CTO of Siemens, and get him interested in this area. Now, Siemens is in, but from the very beginning, they had the standpoint that they are a technology taker and not a technology maker. So their message to me was, at the beginning, if you have something at the end that we can somehow introduce in our systems, that's fine, but don't expect us to invest at this very moment into quantum technology. No way. Maybe they will change, but at the moment they are, let's say, interested, but that's it. And that's, I would say, true not only for a company like Siemens, that's also true for other companies. Maybe there are small groups that are interested in quantum technology, but not at the level that we observe with Google, Microsoft, and so forth. Okay, so one challenge for the flagship in that respect is to really advertise start-up activities. If the big companies don't go into that field right away, we really have to rely on people coming out of academia, for example, starting small businesses that then at the end have to grow. Now, the implementation, again, I don't want to go into details here, is always special in Europe because you don't want to compromise for quality and excellence. On the other hand, the European Union consists of, well, 27 countries in the future, with, taking the Brexit into account. And of course, everybody wants to be part of it. So one also has to come up with some kind of implementation model that takes into account quality and excellence on one side and cohesion on the other side. And from the very beginning, it's clear that consortia have to come up with proposals that are consisting of companies on one side and academic partners on the other side. I think the governance structure is not so important here at this very moment. There's always a fight between the interest of Brussels, they want to decide everything, and the interest of the member states who want, to play their part too. Now, what is the present situation? There will be a ramp-up phase for 3 years. Funding will start January 2019. For the first 3 years, there are roughly 150 million euros already reserved. How will this be distributed among the different pillars? Just to give you an idea, in the 4 vertical pillars, especially computation and communication, money can be asked for up to 10 million euros plus minus per consortium, which means that at the end, taking the overall sum into account, there will be, let's say, 2 to 3, maximum 3 consortia on quantum computation, the same on quantum communication and so forth, which really means that our European colleagues, my European colleagues, have to get their act together and carefully look where do we have strong partnerships between academia and industry to really make it at the end in the evaluation process. Okay, now what about companies? How is your quantum computer prototype coming along? Great, the project exists in a simultaneous state of being both totally successful and not even started. Can I observe it? That's a tricky question. Now, what about companies? I already mentioned that there are companies involved, but not at the level of support with human resources and major investments as in the US. This is a collection, it's not complete, of companies also in Europe being in that area. And I can tell you there is a big debate going on at the moment. Who qualifies from the company side as European and who not? Is IBM European, American, international? Can they be part of it? What about Huawei? What about Toshiba? What about Google? At the moment, Brussels tends to be pretty restrictive. This is something that still has to be discussed. In addition, of course, there's always this question of intellectual property rights. But that's independent of who qualifies to be European and not. Amazing for me is that, for example, colleagues like Rainer Blatt, who is one of the leading persons using ion traps to set up qubits and quantum computing devices, is mainly supported for the engineering part by IARPA. Not by Austrian money, not by European money. He is supported by IARPA. I could give you other examples, and again, something is going wrong in Europe if the engineering part has to rely on US money. Maybe we can discuss about this later on. On the other hand, companies like Microsoft just buy researchers in Europe and put them on their payroll. If you take, for example, the superconducting topological device activities of Leo Kovenhoven at Delft in the Netherlands or Charlie Marcus in Copenhagen, they both switched, like John Martinez, to Google, to Microsoft in that case. So they are now on the payroll of Microsoft. Their salary is paid by Microsoft, and they are supported by Microsoft. That's fine for the field as a whole, but again, it's a tricky issue now with respect to the European activities. How do we deal with our former European colleagues who are now, let's say, active at the international level? Fine. So quantum is always good, you know, you can work with it, you can drink it, maybe you can even eat it. Thank you for your attention. Questions? Yes, please.
Can you comment on kind of investment in software versus? Can you comment on investment in software versus hardware, as well as where do you think the majority of the value creation for the European Union will be? Will it be in the software or the hardware?
First question, I would say 90%, 10%. 10%, let's say, software at the moment. Value creation, I think sensing and metrology is probably closest to the market. If you take a company like Bosch, who is earning a lot of money with sensors, you all have probably Bosch sensors in your iPhones and so forth. They are interested in devices like the nitrogen vacancy centers in diamond, for example, as one kind of system where they can very sensitively measure magnetic fields and so forth. So I think the sensor business is the closest to market. Maybe they can make a few hundred million of euros turnover in the next 5 to 10 years. Communication is probably the next one. Question is it just a niche application for safe communication of data between banks or, I mean, special institutions, or will it become some kind of, quantum web? There are challenges. We heard this morning. If you want to amplify signals, you really need a completely different approach. You need not amplifiers, you need quantum repeaters and so forth. So that's, I think, a little bit further away down the road. As a matter of fact, big telecom companies in Europe so far are not so interested in it. And then there is quantum simulation and quantum computation, and I already commented on that.
At the mic.
Yes?
I am from Siemens, and I would like to dispel this notion that we are not serious.
Okay.
That's the one say.
Okay, good. As we say in German, Ihr Wort in Gottes Ohren. Okay, thank you.